Happiness is beautiful, it's a kind reality. Happiness is the highest good, happiness is free. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.
Welcome to the Happiness Show. This is Lionel Ketchian. I'm here with George Ortega, and we're here to talk about happiness because happiness is, always has been, and always will be the point of it all. Today we'll be talking about happiness in an imperfect world. Well, in a world of tsunamis, Iraqi war, famine, accidents, illness, I guess it's business as always.
Yeah.
How can we be happy in a world full of all of this?
Okay, well, fortunately, the fact is that, many of us are happy. Like here in the United States, 90% of us are happy. We're not as happy as we could be. But the idea is that, yes, it's a very imperfect world. You've got wars, you've got extreme poverty, you've got so many problems, political problems, people lack freedom, then you have the illnesses, and you have so much that can happen in life that's so far from perfect. And many of us, unfortunately, see a world like this and they conclude to themselves, well, how can a person possibly be happy in a world like this? When this show is going to try to present to people like that the idea that yes, we should be constantly doing as much as we can to address all of these problems. The poverty, the injustice, work on medical research. But as we're doing that, as we're doing as much as we can to make this world more perfect, a very powerful way of helping us to do this actually is for us to feel as happy as possible.
Yes, George, I agree with you. And sometimes, we've talked about in prior shows, we've talked about people starving in the world, the injustice in the world, that half the world is impoverished, is hungry, has very little money, leads a pretty tough existence, let's face it. And it would be nice if we did more for others. That's one aspect of something we've talked about. But I want to propose, in an imperfect world that we live in, the idea, and I want to bounce it off you to see what you think. In this kind of a world, not judging it, but observing it in full, full faith that this is the world we live in. It is what it is. It's good. It's bad. It's all of that. Can happiness within the individual, can my working on my happiness actually contribute to the world's benefit? That's a question I have for you.
Yeah, and we know the answer because we know that it can.
Okay.
We know that that emotions are contagious. That we know that the research demonstrates that as people become happier, we become more compassionate, more productive, more cooperative. We become healthier. So really, yeah, that's the key. That yes, as we become happier as individuals, rather than feeling guilty about becoming happier in a world where so many people are less than happy or not very happy, we should really be feeling very good that we're becoming happier, and then not, of course, just stop at that, but then share our happiness with others as much as we can, and then have that happiness fuel our efforts to help make the world more perfect.
Yes, in that light, I know that happiness for me, my own work within myself with happiness, has, sometimes this is a hard thing to talk about, but I think it has increased my kindness for people, although that's a funny thing to be talking about for oneself, to walk around saying I'm a kinder person. It sounds like I'm trying to sell myself to someone, but I'm just trying to be honestly aware of how it's affected me. Now, the reason I bring that up is because in becoming kinder or being more compassionate, that's another aspect of kindness, being more compassionate to others, their particular situations in life, their suffering, their unhappiness. I've wanted to contribute to that in any way I can and in every way I could. And I know that if it wasn't for my happiness, I couldn't have continued to do that, because I would have completely burned myself out even trying. Because let's face it, this isn't something that you do, you put it's not like winning a race. You don't run for a marathon and then it's over and the winners are announced. Running a race of this caliber and trying to make the world happier isn't even something that we may see in our lifetime. It's just that the race has begun because it feels good to do the running. I think that's because it benefits me, first of all. And I think that with the qualities that we find in ourselves with happiness, like compassion, which is no small quality, by the way. In fact, Buddhism, The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, the head of Buddhism for the most part, I mean, he talks about happiness as the most important thing there is, and that's an aspect of their religion. And in fact, that happiness is a way out of suffering, or at least an aspect of it. But he talks about happiness and compassion and kindness. And if those are the qualities that could make us more caring as human beings, then happiness is really important, especially in an imperfect world like the one we live in.
Yeah. And Lionel, I think you also raise a very important point, because, yes, people feel guilty sometimes feeling happy in a world that's imperfect.
That's true.
A lot of times we also have this kind of like false sense of modesty, that like you're relating how the happiness is helping you to become kinder. That's a virtue, that's a form of goodness, right? And a lot of times we're kind of like taught in this society to not even acknowledge, our goodness, and the importance of not just knowing our goodness and working on it and expressing it to others is that the definition of goodness is what creates happiness, both for ourselves and others. The greatest goodness, of course, is what creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number. So as we acknowledge and celebrate and express our goodness, both to ourselves and others, that emphasizes the importance of goodness in our lives. And again, our society teaches us this kind of false modesty to not acknowledge or express our goodness. But when I was studying Orthodox Judaism, I learned that Moses, according to Judaism, was the greatest prophet, right? And he's also known as the most humble person. Of course, who knows whether that's true or not, of course, but that's the teaching. And the idea is that he understood both things. He understood his greatness as a prophet, and he expressed and behaved in the most humble of ways. So, and without any guilt, because both, happiness and goodness are very powerful for not just helping ourselves, but helping the rest of the world. Yeah.
And basically, if you think about Moses, he was a leader. He was leading people. He was a teacher. He was leading people in their virtues. He was connected to God, and he also shared that aspect, with people then. So all of this is really, and I would think that if he wasn't happy, he wouldn't have the energy to do it all. So maybe even with Moses, happiness, in spite of it all, for him was important. Because how could anybody have that kind of energy and wisdom if he didn't have an aspect of happiness within himself?
Well, yeah, I don't think many people, we use the word bless a lot, in Judaism and Christianity. Most people don't realize that the word bless means happiness. Bless you, God bless you, God make you happy. You say a blessing, you express your joy for something.
Right.
So yeah, it's very important. We should address something. A lot of us feel that we can't we can't be happy or as happy as we should be in this imperfect world. But we've got to, Lionel, stress the point that it may be decades. Hopefully, it'll be relatively soon. But the world may be imperfect in various ways for decades, maybe centuries. And so the idea is that, you know, this imperfection may be to a great extent unavoidable, so that, you know, because of that, it makes very little sense for us as individuals and us as a society, as a people, to postpone our happiness until the world finally becomes, in our eyes, good enough.
In fact, I think the opposite would be true. If we don't become happier, I think we prevent and prolong the world's suffering, is how I feel.
Yes.
Because I think happiness could actually alleviate and cause for the better many things to go in better ways, and the feeling that people will feel more a feeling of cooperation, a feeling of we're in it together. Sometimes if you look at suffering, and if you want to just label the imperfection a cause for suffering, or a causative force for suffering, that maybe the purpose of suffering is to come together, is to realize that suffering is probably just a teacher for us. And if we could learn the lesson that it has to teach us, maybe that lesson is happiness. Maybe it's as simple as that.
It definitely is. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's like the idea, happiness and goodness. Like, a lot of times what happens is, like, it is happiness, but of course it's not just our happiness. It's happiness of all of us. So sometimes, yeah, we do something wrong, and whether it's God or nature, you know, we get punished. Mm-hmm. Why? Because what we did may or may not have been in our best favor, but it, you know, perhaps wasn't in the favor of others. So nature and God has to teach us, you know, through punishment, through suffering, to change our behavior so that we're really benefiting, again, not just ourselves, but everyone. Mm-hmm. The idea, yeah, the world may be imperfect for a very long time, and I forgot my thought. Go ahead.
Well, you know, it may be imperfect, and then again, maybe it's the way we look at this world.
Right.
Because maybe the world isn't so imperfect as we think, but the imperfection that we see is probably more so that of our humanness than anything else.
Okay, I got it. Okay. Yes, definitely. And no, you reminded me. It's the idea that, like, the imperfection, as you were saying, it's about our humanness in a sense that a lot of times we give a lot of attention to those imperfections that aren't necessarily related to happiness. For example, like, if we're addressing poverty, you know, that's very related to happiness. We should definitely be working on it and consider that very important. Freedom is very important. But, like, for example, what's very inevitable for us, and probably will be for decades to come, is that as we age, our body deteriorates. We get ill, we die, you know? Mm-hmm. And these things, for many of us, are great imperfections. We evaluate them as imperfect, not realizing that with those imperfections, with death and with illness, they don't have to prevent our happiness. You know, research demonstrates lottery winners, they win, you know, $1 million, $2, $3 million in the lottery. 6 months, their happiness level is back to the same level it was before they won. People get involved in tragic accidents, you know, that many of us would think would destroy the rest of their lives. According to the research, these people are back to almost their state of happiness before the accident. So
same is true with prisoners.
Yeah, well, that's great. So the idea is that, you know, a lot of times, you know, these imperfections that definitely do exist may continue to exist for decades or centuries, but they in no way have to impinge upon our level of happiness.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the suffering may really be there in order to help us learn that happiness is an answer for us. Because if there was no question, how could there be an answer? So it's almost a guide to bring us back to what's important for us, what's good for us. And pretty much our way of living has always been a desire. If we have a desire for something, we want it bad, then that's pretty much what our purpose becomes and what our life becomes, and we go after it. And that's why money is still today been the reason people want more money, is because that's their only measure of success or inner fulfillment. And also, it's their way of being a status symbol. I mean, because it's almost like the more money I have, the more I could be accepted by others, and the more they'll love me, for what I have. And really, money just translates into something underlying it, which is acceptance, which is wanting to be with others. Basically you begin by wanting the money for other reasons than you may even imagine. You really want it for acceptance and love and fitting in with others and sharing and having friends. But you don't need the money to have any of those things, which is the funny part of it all.
Oh yeah. And that's something we have to learn. Something we also have to learn is that with this imperfect world, there's just no value. There's no need. There's no value in losing our happiness. If we lose our happiness, we're not going to become better people. As a matter of fact, we're going to become less able to help those of us in need. So there's really no value to losing our happiness, to becoming less happy. And again, to the contrary, as we become happier, we become more empowered to help. And the other part is that there really is no need to lose our happiness, amidst an imperfect world. If we're leading ethical lives, if we're doing as much as we can to help those of us in need, then we're doing our part, and there's no need for us to feel guilty. And so, there's no need to lose our happiness.
You're right about losing happiness because, first of all, you have to have it to feel the sense of loss. And many people may feel that, well, I never really experienced happiness. But I know two people that come to mind now that had happiness and realized they lost it, and they were losing it, or they lost it because of loved ones in their immediate life. And I know because they had come to me to talk to me about this individually. Neither one knows the other, but each one said to me, I want my happiness back. So I bring this up because they, at least in their suffering and loss, they realized the value of happiness, that they lost something. And they weren't talking about the loss of their loved ones. That they couldn't do anything about. They were talking about the loss of their happiness. Oh, yeah. And they realized that they had lost their happiness because they had lost something they couldn't control in the world, some people that they loved. Now, I think it's phenomenal because I was able to show them that they were right in their pursuit of happiness, of regaining it, and I showed them how easy it was to regain their happiness. And they knew this. That's why they came to me in the first place. And they were able to regain their happiness totally. And really what I'm saying to you is that even though the situation was as it was, they were able to overcome, not the situation, but overcome themselves and regain happiness, and then use happiness to their benefit. So I think this is a very important, empowering message, that no matter what happens out there, it's not the circumstances or the people or the situations that can make you unhappy. It's just your outlook, your decision, your choice. And so the world can always beat you down, but only with your agreement can it keep you down. And if you have not experienced happiness before, you really owe it to yourself and the world to experience it now. Because if you ever lose it, then at least you would know that this was not something I could live for long without. I must regain my happiness because it's more important than anything.
Right, and you're referring to someone who came up to you about having lost someone very important in their lives. Now there are sometimes two factors that come into play with their losing their happiness. Mm-hmm. One, of course, is that we know that other people, especially our significant other, our spouse, is generally for most of us our main source of happiness. Mm-hmm. So again, that when we're removed from that, we have to reorient our lives. We have to bring more people into it. We have to replace what we were receiving from that person. But another component that maybe is not as clearly understood is that our society, in large part, doesn't understand perhaps death as well as it could, doesn't understand happiness. And so that, I think a lot of people are afraid to regain their happiness because they're afraid to be seen seen by others as callous, as indifferent to the loss of their spouse, to the loss of their family member. They're afraid to be judged, as a bad person, And so now we have a teaching. When I was learning Orthodox Judaism, according to Jewish law, a person was given 1 week to grieve, to show outward signs of pain and loss and all. After that week, it was forbidden to show those signs anymore. I mean, one might feel it in one's heart. Certainly, every year there's a celebration or an acknowledgement of life, acknowledgement of the person who passed away. But again, according to Jewish law, one is not allowed to grieve for over a week, and that is something that the world needs to learn. That, especially here in the United States, that no, it's not a virtue. It's not a virtue to prolong our pain, to lose our happiness for month after month, year after year, in fear of being considered by others as not a good person, and often by ourselves as not a good person.
Well, I feel what you're saying, George, is most profound, because it would be wonderful if we could come to understand it. If we were all given 1 week and no more, I think what that would do would be to allow the grieving process to occur, but then allow the alarm clock to go off to realize that, look, if you prolong this grieving process, not only will it not do you any good, but it'll project you into a downhill spiral that could keep you there for the rest of your life, enabling you to feel helpless, hopeless, on medication and requiring lots of outside intervention, and not only hurting yourself, but hurting your whole family and society as a whole. So, brilliant. I mean, I wish the world would adopt that kind of thinking, because it's badly needed. And boy, is that a good rule. If that's a tradition, I'd love to see that in a very common way out in the world, because you're right. You began the discussion by the fact that we don't understand death, and that's another reason we don't understand happiness. Part of it is acceptance of the things we can't change. It's that simple.
Right. Lionel, let's address the issue of we do have an imperfect world, and so much of our lives are devoted to making it more and more perfect as each day passes. But let's explore how happiness can really help us do that.
Well, what were you thinking in this regard?
The idea of, firstly, acknowledging as a world that happiness is what life is about. That life isn't about overcoming problems. Life isn't about making our world as perfect as possible. Life is about all of us becoming as happy as possible. And that goal is far easier than creating as perfect a world as possible.
Well, I think we might even stop looking at it as a goal if we really studied the idea that happiness is all we want. Then you would just realize that everything you do so you could derive happiness. We've just been going about it the long way. We've been trying to do things to get happiness when we could just become happy, and that would enable us to do things better.
Lionel, think about, for example, for many countries in the world, you have the Iraq War, you have the threat of war, you have this international conflict, terrorism, okay? All these negative, aggressive aspects of our world are caused by unhappiness. Like a leader feels that if it goes to war with another country, provokes a war, they're going to be happier. Terrorists feel that if they, overthrow a certain government, they're going to be happier. A lot of people who incite war, who incite terrorism, use a population's unhappiness to motivate them. They say to them, "You're dissatisfied, and those other people are the cause." So naturally, as our world becomes happier, that becomes one less motivator of aggression toward other people. And if people are much happier, if people become much happier, they are much less likely to want to risk that happiness, going to war with others. I mean,
well, here's what I would address at this point, because you addressed the point by saying that Happiness is being responsible. It's the ultimate responsibility. And as you said, as long as there are leaders who can convince people that the reason their lives are no good are because of others or other situations that occur, and this is why they have to be unhappy and they have to risk their life or lose their life, then that's one way of being irresponsible. The world really needs to awaken to the idea that we ultimately are responsible for our own feelings, our own thoughts, and not others. And if we could become happier in spite of what's going on, we could actually enable ourselves to deal so much better with the problems of the world.
Well, wait a minute. You said that we're responsible for our happiness, but not the happiness of others, or?
Well, I don't know if I said that, but we certainly aren't responsible for the happiness of others. If they're terrorists or something, that's
all right. Well, I personally believe we are. I believe that, like, being good is really assuming responsibility, not just for our happiness, but for the happiness of others. But beyond that, it's not about responsibility really. It's about wisdom.
Okay.
It's about the idea that when we shift our focus from, exclusively or primarily our happiness to the happiness of the greatest number, the greatest happiness, that's going to help not only them so much more, but it'll come back to us,
Okay, I guess what we're saying is I put the total focus within the individual. And the individual could be so powerful in becoming happy that it could affect everybody, but it must begin there. Because as long as the individual is irresponsible, the world's in chaos.
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, like, the idea is that, like, if a person really wants to help the world and they're not very happy, they're not going to be very effective in a lot of it. Sometimes, like, if they're, for example, if they're a scientist working on a cure or something, and they may not be enjoying the stuff, but they may be very creative with their work. But in a lot of stuff that has to be done on a daily basis, then definitely, yeah, becoming happier will help the world that way.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, we do agree, but these are so complicated issues that it's hard to understand them fully. But again, we brought up some interesting points on an imperfect world and being happy. And happiness prevails. I mean, when you really think about it, it is the wisdom that we need, and it is the wisdom that we need badly. So with that, we want to tell you that is all the time we have for you today. Thanks very much for watching. In the future, we'll explore other topics designed to help us all better enjoy life. Be good, think well, feel very happy, and I hope you'll join us again next week on The Happiness Show.
Happiness is powerful. It's our underlying need. Happiness is why we live each day. Happiness is destiny. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Let's be so very happy.